welcome. You're watching the Week in Review, and despite the mask, it is me, your host, Adedarami. And as ever, I have a very, very special guest. And this week, I have Mustafa K. Dabo from Malagan, which is an online publication and definitely one that you should check out. Mustafa, thanks and welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, thank you. And for anybody who's watching for the very first time, the program, The Week in Review, this is how it works. We play 10 stories, and then Mustafa and I will go in and discuss them in detail, analyze them in a bit more detail, and these will all have been stories that we featured on QTV News for the week just gone. So let's crack on. The first one is to do with the price of fish. Now, take a look at this video, and I'm sure you, like me, have been complaining about the price of fish. Anyway, have a look at this.
Fish is an essential commodity in almost every Gambian household, and certainly one of Gambia's most valuable natural resources is its area of the Atlantic Ocean, which used to be rich in fish stocks with prices that were affordable to many. This is in contrast to the present day, when our country is low on fish stocks. Fishermen, fishmongers, market-based fish vendors, and consumers have reacted to this food crisis with frustration.
Before, I would sometimes buy fish for $250. It is different today. Here I am at the market today having to buy $500. That is so expensive for us.
That is so expensive for us. Now, as somebody who grew up in Freetown in Sierra Leone, which of course is also a coastal city, I thought Sierra Leoneans ate a lot of fish, and until I came to the Gambia, then I knew what eating a lot of fish. Mustafa, we've all been complaining about this, and you and I were just discussing before we came on air about some of the problems as to why, from your own observations, why do you think that the price has gone through the roof?
This is a very complex problem, and I first have to confess that there would not be a soundbite solution to it. Sure. So Gambia is faced with a number of challenges when it comes to fish. First, you would know that we have a lot of illegal or reported and unregulated fishing in our waters. Gambia, Sierra Leone, all these countries on the coastline, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal. So Gambia has actually a 200-mile water coastline. Right. Out of it, we have capacity to do surveillance in only 60 miles.
That's right.
But even that in a limited way, I think about an average of 9 hours.
Yes.
And Navy can't go deep sea.
They cannot.
So there's a lot of illegal fishing, which means that the catches, and according to Greenpeace, in fact, about 40 to 60 catches are illegal or reported fishing. That means they don't land our source, we lose them. And we lose money also. But also there are fish meals. Sure. You know, fish meals also consuming a lot of our catches. In fact, right now, the biggest contention in the Combo South, where you have the 3 fish mills, is that fish mills are using their money to give money to fishermen.
Yes.
And when they give money to fishermen, for example, if you give a fisherman 300,000, for example, any
and say,
catch,
bring your catch to me.
And say, bring the catch to me.
Yes.
So probably it takes him, let's say, a week to be able to bring the fish that you are paid for.
Correct.
So that means that if you come with limited catch every day, it goes to the fish mill.
Of course.
Instead of the common person.
The market, yes.
And then also, you know, we have a lot of, I don't know the right word to use, but you could say foreigners in the Gambian waters and Gambians themselves not motivated to go into fishing. For example,
well, I'm glad you mentioned that point. Sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
For example, if you look at the number, if you have found the magal they do in Tuba. Yes. If you found a time like that in this country, you will realize that there's a huge shortage of fish, because most of the people because most of the people who are in those waters are actually Senegalese. Yes. And so we also have a lot of fishing agreement that's also taking a lot. In addition to illegal or reported or unregulated fishing, You have fishing agreement with Senegal, and they're in our waters.
Indeed.
Your fishing agreement with Mauritania, your fishing agreement with European Union, and they are all in the waters. So you have a country that is literally under attack. Its marine resources under attack, but also with limited capacity to be able to fight back.
I mean, I'm glad there are several things you mentioned there that are quite interesting, and one of them is exactly as you said, the thing about fighting back. Because I think last year there was a vessel that came, the Sea something, can't remember what it was called.
Sea Shepherd.
Sea Shepherd. That's right. And they, according to even in the report that we broadcast, when they were here, they were able to really make a difference.
Absolutely.
And you know, many more arrests than they'd ever made. Which shows you that we need something. So is it a case that government should actually be reaching out to these partners saying, you know, these are the kinds of things we need to safeguard the fish stocks that are in our, because it matters to us very much.
So so in addition to working with partners like Greenpeace, Sea Shepherd and other activists and other organizations, they need to do that, but they need to also empower the Navy. For example, the Gambian Navy does have the personnel, but they don't have the capacity. So if you had provide them with surveillance boats, you'd provide them with speedboats, and you'd provide them with adequate resources to go into the high seas, then you would see that probably it would, and also money. For example, these people can't go to the seas for say about a week and be plying on the seas or a month or so in other words, you have two forces that are fighting, and the people who are illegally in our waters have a capacity that far surpasses the forces that are supposed to stop them. So you have to create a balance to be able to counter. And that's the most challenging thing right now, but also climate change. I mean, and climate variability. Gambia, it's a very vulnerable country when it comes to this. And but if we deal with fish meals, perhaps we may deal with a greater part of the challenges, because not in fact long ago, in June, a Canadian activist did a study around this area, and then they concluded that, matter of fact, even Greenpeace released a report, which is a waste of fish.
Well thumbed report.
And it detailed a number of challenges this country has. Senegal has, and Morocco, Tunisia, but also with the Gambia specific, they detailed the consequences that the operation of the fish mills are having on our fish stock. And then you would see that even if you look at the statistics, I was reading yesterday the ITC trade map, and you'd see that between 2017 to 2018, within that short period, we have exported about 4,000 tons of fish oil from the Gambia. So this is huge. I mean, you're talking about tons of oil, fish oil, not just tons of fish. So it's huge. I think it's a complex problem that requires well thought out policies from the Ministry of Fisheries.
Thanks for that, Mustafa. As Mustafa says, a complex problem, and one that I'm glad he said a soundbite isn't going to do it justice. And I think even from the brief conversation we've had here, I think that proves the point. So once again, thanks for that, Mustafa. Now on to our next topic, and of course everybody has been impacted by COVID, and probably if I say more so, there'll probably be objection, but schools certainly have been heavily impacted by the closures forced upon them by COVID. Have a look at this report, and when we come back, we'll delve into the subject a bit more. I chose that clip for several reasons. One of them is me being quite mischievous because he's talking about the cost of buying face masks, and you would have noticed at that meeting he's the only one not wearing a face mask. But really the more serious point is about preparedness in terms of the schools. Now, at some point, the minister, government and others must have realized that we will have to be prepared for reopening. Do you get the sense that we have actually, because I don't get that sense from that. I don't want to prejudice your answer, but I don't get the sense from that. He's still asking for others to come forward and help. Why are we making that plea this late in the day?
So I think that to understand our COVID-19 issue and the problem we confronted with, one would probably look at the greater response effort. And I think that, of course, we all agree school needs to reopen, and there's no doubt about that. The times that the students are losing, it's quite huge.
It's significant.
And yes, and then, but to be able to do this, I think, if anything, right now, having gone few months into COVID-19, we all know that this is something based on what health experts are saying, that we have to learn to live with it. So in that case, that means you have to learn to live with it. You have to learn to also learn with it. So that means that either ways they will have to create resources. They should have thought of that, to create resources to be able to bring education back to the children. So what do? We were able to allocate resources of $500 million for health.
That's right.
Of course, a lot of which goes to quarantine and hotels and food, hotels and medication. We could have strategized this money and probably thought of expenditure in other areas. Because we are facing a lot of complex problems. No country was prepared for it, but there is no excuse to cry.
Well, indeed. And we've said this many, many times. Even the so-called, first world countries with all their systems in place, let alone ours with our very weak systems. So nobody, and really I'm glad you said that, because we're not blaming government. But what we're saying is that in spite of that, we shouldn't cry about it. We should prepare for how we're going to deal with it. And that's what we really need to be doing. And that's what, as I said, I don't get the sense that we're doing.
And we are facing a very complex, unique problem that those first world countries, so-called first world countries, are not facing, because they can go e-learning. And we're having a significant challenge in terms of internet access, in terms of even the facilities to do e-learning in mass.
I mean, if just quickly on that one, in the very, very first one of these programs, I mentioned the fact that my sister works in a school in Miami that has over 1,000 students. They gave every one of them a laptop. We can't do that.
We can't do that. We're complaining about 7,000 plus. And this is the challenge. So probably the right thing to do is to now focus their energies and see how they can mobilize resources in order to provide face masks and sanitary items to schools. This is doable. If you are talking about 35 million, we have spent 1.18 billion on COVID-19 related matters from March to July. So that's a lot of money. We could have, there is a lot we could do. Health Ministry alone, out of their approval by beginning of August, 1st August, they've spent around $273 million. Health Ministry. So this is huge. But they could strategize more. For example, now that we are opening our borders and we are also thinking of opening the economy broadly and lifting some restrictions, they could probably utilize the money that they are going to spend on quarantine, for example, because tourists would not come and quarantine
for
a lot of them would come with their test results as the new regulations are showing. So when they do come, now the money we're supposed to spend on quarantine now, we could utilize that to buy face masks for students and probably other materials that probably students would need. But we definitely can strategize within the available resources to accommodate.
And I'm glad the minister, because he was making the point, if we had let him speak longer, was that, as he rightly said, it's not just about face masks, but he was giving the enormity of the task. If you were looking at face masks alone, the cost of that, let alone everything else that they need to put in place. And he did mention some of the kind of sensible things and the precautions that they need to take in order to let parents and students and teachers feel safe, that yes, the schools are reopening, I can send my child and I can feel safe. And so,
well, if there is anything we learn from economists, is that you never have limited resources.
They're always finite.
Yeah,
they're not infinite.
Yeah, it's always you never have enough.
Yeah, quite.
You know, so you have to prioritize and study within the resources you have to do what is necessary, what needs to be done. For example, now we know a lot of money we spend on quarantine now will be saved.
Yeah, quite.
We can save that. We can avoid sending people who are not even symptomatic or does not even show signs of
into quarantine,
which is what we were doing. That's a total waste of money.
To
even no
colleagues.
country in Europe was or anywhere in the world was doing that. So we could save that money and take it to the school.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that. And also glad to say that one of the things that was mentioned in the early days of COVID-19 was that when they said, where is all this 500 million coming from, they talked about the travel budget that used to be allocated to ministries. No traveling, that budget could be saved. And so going forward, they could save even more as this thing gets longer, because what had been set aside for travel budget is no longer going to be spent for that. Everybody's getting used now to holding virtual meetings, and that's going to be so for the foreseeable future. So thanks for that, Mustafa. And now on to our next topic. And again, of course, even at ECOWAS meeting, COVID-19 was top of the agenda, but so was security. Hopefully you'll get a glimpse of what they were talking about from this little clip.
The ECOWAS Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security informed the Council that the political situation in the Gambia is relatively calm and peaceful, but still remains unpredictable due to issues revolving around the constitutional review process and conduct of the referendum in readiness for the 2021 presidential and parliamentary elections. The Council, however, recommended that all stakeholders are carried along by the IEC in the ongoing electoral reforms and that the outcomes of the reform processes should be implemented. It further recommended that the ECOWAS Commission seeks extension for the mandate of ECOMIC to enable the forces monitor the peaceful implementation of the TRC hearings.
Talking about security being top of the agenda, we'll go on to the broader West African context, but let's think about Gambia first, because I think the headline was that there is going to be an extension on the troops being based here. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first I think that, I'm of the view that ECOMIC, we should now strategize for their exit. And nevertheless, we should make a point that this is a country in debt to its sister countries in the region. And that's often that's clouded by the sentiments that ECOWAS should leave. If you say ECOWAS should leave, you should also be grateful for what the soldiers have done. Because if for anything, the presence of ECOMIC was a stabilizing factor.
Absolutely.
And then also, of course, you can praise the Gambian army, but you can also praise the regional forces.
Indeed.
And then ECOWAS may be inefficient in a lot of ways, but it's at least the most efficient by most observers regional bloc in this continent.
In the continent, yeah.
But secondly, I think that the reason why I want ECOMIC to leave, or for us to strategize to get ECOMIC leave,
kind of
because
have an exit strategy.
Is because there are pending reforms that authorities are dragging their feet to do.
Sure.
And these reforms, we know that our security sector is not the best. We know there are incredible professional soldiers in this country. But if you look at our challenges, let's just look at the challenges the security sector poses, for example. In 3 years, for example, even though we have a very calm security environment, we had soldiers in two situations, we had soldiers treason, trial for attempt to overthrow.
Yes, indeed.
2 situations in 3 years.
Yeah.
And the third one is that you have a bunch of soldiers who come together to say they want to arrest their CDS. Those are symptoms of disturbing symptoms that gets us all jolted. What is going on?
What's going on? Yes.
Of course, this is not to indict the army. I think that the greater bulk of the army wants peace. Of course, they could have followed Jambe into his attempt to stand up to the region, which we know was going to be devastating.
A disaster. Yes,
yeah, and then but you have also some section of the army to deal with.
Sure.
So look at the human rights violations coming out of the TRRC.
Yeah.
So what we should have done is to professionalize the army. Not just that there is no professionals, but to empower the army, train more. In terms of I mean training of the mind.
Yes. But don't you get the sense that that professionalizing of the army is taking place? I mean, we've just had deployments of troops, I think 66 coming back to Darfur. And the sort of report card on them from their superiors and the peacekeepers was the highest praise that they could possibly give about the professionalism of the Gambian soldiers.
Well, we have a very disciplined force in a lot of ways.
Yes.
But we also have a very disciplined force in some ways.
Yes.
I'm a friend of the army. I've known some soldiers, a number of them. But to be honest, some of the signs we see is that the major problem is the mindset.
Sure.
For example, if you had seen some soldiers testified at the TRRC, you have seen Sana Sabali, it took him 30 minutes, push back and forth with Isafal to take from him an opinion that soldiers have the right to intervene when the civilian authority fails.
Yeah, quite.
And these are the people who presided over the army at the beginning.
That's right.
And also Jammeh had so much influence on the army.
Of course.
And so those sentiments, those mentalities are still there. There's still some element that is still element of tyranny.
Sure.
And so I think that the army is great and we should strategize for economic relief, but also the army is too much.
Sure.
We have about 7,000, close to 7,000 foot soldiers.
That's right.
Security sector alone, it's disturbing to know that 4 out of every 10 Gambia government employees
is in the security sector.
Sure,
I think we have to leave on that statistic because we have to go to a commercial break. But thank you for that. Some food for thought there from Mustafa. And so we'll take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about Literacy Day 2020. Don't go away. Join us after this quick break.
Gambia may be the smallest country in Africa, but it will host the second largest gathering of world leaders in 2022. To successfully host the OIC Summit and put the Gambia on the global stage, the government of the Gambia set up OIC Gambia to mobilize resources for the implementation of key development and infrastructure projects on a scale never seen before. 20 new roads will be constructed across the country, and the Bertel-Harding Highway will be expanded into a dual carriage highway of 2 lanes on each side from the airport to Sting Corner. All people in the Gambia deserve clean water and a constant flow of electricity. Therefore, an entirely new water system will be constructed, including new transmission and distribution networks to meet the increasing demand. In order to provide a more reliable supply of electricity, the OIC Gambia project will replace and double the capacity of the NAWEC transformers and overhead electric cables. We will equip the police with modern apparatus and technical training in an effort to keep the streets of the Gambia safe. By building the largest international conference center in the region, a 5-star hotel with state-of-the-art facilities, first-class mobility services, and improving the VVIP experience at the Banjul International Airport, OIC Gambia will position the Gambia as the leading conference destination in West Africa. With our partners in the tourism sector, we will reinforce the preeminent position of our nation, the Smiling Coast, as a go-to destination. The OIC Gambia will create strategic partnerships that calls for the involvement of local talent and businesses as a matter of requirement. In short, OIC Gambia projects will create jobs, boost commerce, accelerate growth, improve the urban outlook and lifestyles of many families across the Gambia. So let's support the OIC Gambia as it prepares us for one of the biggest global events, OIC Gambia, building today for a better tomorrow.
Tap into our many and active followers online. Join our social community by calling 32444444 or send us a message on any of our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. QTV Gambia.
Welcome back after that short commercial break. And in case you've just joined, this is the week in review. I'm your host, Ade Darami, and my very, very special guest is Mustafa K. Dabo of Malagan. Now, Mustafa, before the break there, I said when we come back, we'll be looking at Literacy Day, something that I'm sure you and I are very, very keen on, and we were having discussions before we came on. For the viewers, have a look at this clip, and you'll see why it's important, and when we come back, we'll discuss that.
With every aspect of life being dominated by COVID-19, International Literacy Day 2020 focuses on how the pandemic has affected literacy teaching and learning and looks beyond the COVID-19 crisis. It seeks to put the role of educators and changing methods of teaching and learning at the center of lifelong learning experience, focusing mainly on youth and adults. Highlighting some of the key areas of focus, Modulamin Sow, the Secretary General of the Gambia Writers Association, said it is impossible to overemphasize the importance of the day, adding that it is a day to reflect on progress and achievements made through reading and learning.
And in fact, what the Secretary General of the Writers Association of the Gambia went on to say was that they had a very ambitious project, which is that they want to wipe out illiteracy from the Gambia in 10 years' time. I thought that was quite ambitious. And I'll say this very, very quickly because I actually had into the report what the literacy rate is. So the country was independent in 1965. We're now in 2020. The literacy rate stands at 55.5%. In Senegal, it is 57.5%. In Guinea-Bissau, it is 59.5%. I'm almost embarrassed to mention the rate in Cape Verde, but I will. It's 87.6%. And they've been independent for 10 years less than us. Yeah. Now, I think they're likely to hit that 100% much quicker than we are.
Yes, absolutely.
But on a more serious note, and this is a very serious thing because the countries that have higher rates of literacy also have higher rates of progress in all sorts of things. But to go to the day itself, I mean, what are your thoughts on a day like this? And should it be, of course, it should be more than just a day, surely.
Certainly, and I think it also happened at a very inconvenient time of COVID-19.
With COVID-19.
And as I was watching the clip, what comes to my mind is also how much we could also learn from this period to adapt to a different skill, a different learning situation. For example, how do we take learning in a most convenient way to people in the remotest parts of the country through technology? And
to be fair to the UN, as part of the page dedicated to the day, that's exactly the kind of thing they talk about, saying that COVID has forced us to actually think like that.
Exactly. And for me, this is a new tool that should be utilized, because we all thought this is not possible. Until now, we are challenged with it. And as we are adjusting to the COVID, the impositions on us by COVID, we came to learn new ways. And I think that we could now use technology in a much faster way to take education to remotest parts of this country, which will be more efficient and probably more cost effective. The most important thing in any nation's history is literacy. Unless you have your people educated to read and learn, you can't have participatory democracy.
That's right.
You can't have everybody on the same page.
Quite.
How fair is it to even judge me by a law I can't read?
And it's interesting, when Amilcar Cabral was fighting in Bissau, I got my colleagues to watch a film that was made in 1960 something of the fight to oust the Portuguese, 68 or 69, I think. And what was interesting was that he said that in the towns that we have captured, just in those towns that we've captured from the Portuguese, we have established more schools than the Portuguese had established in their whole time of colonizing Guinea-Bissau.
And you will see now Cape Verde being part of that same...
absolutely, yes, which was part of the same struggle. And he was making the point. And because they asked him, why is this important? He said, because the day we kick out the Portuguese, we don't want them or anybody else to say we're not educated enough to run our own affairs.
Absolutely.
That's why it matters.
That's why it matters. And you know, it goes to the heart of governance itself. Every country needs its citizens, all of its citizens, to be participating in the governance process. And in order to do that, you need to educate the masses. And you know, it's the critical mass that moves a country.
You've mentioned a very important thing, because it's something that I've written articles about. Is there a sense that in some countries, including my own Sierra Leone, there's a benefit to actually keeping people uneducated, particularly from some of our politicians? Because what they tend to do is that my father could go to his village and say, I'm a Madinga, vote for me. And people will vote. Not, here are my policies, vote for these policies. And so when you have an uneducated populace, as you said, they don't know what the rules are and the laws that govern them that they're actually voting for. Do you get a sense that there is the kind of selfish element from some politicians?
Well, that has been the most dominant argument from a lot of our commentators, that people are willingly made uneducated because that makes them vulnerable.
And pliable. You can you can mold them if
true. But you know, for any politician who is serious, you would realize that by educating people, you're in fact empowering yourself
and the country,
because you are making it easy for your job to be done. Because it's only when you have everybody with you, whether they are supporting your agenda or being against your agenda, because that's why John Fowles calls it counter-supporting, because there is no such thing as being totally against the agenda. If I am your enemy, I tell you what your weaknesses are, and that's a good thing you need for progress. So I think that's the most significant thing, to have everybody uneducated. As Sidi Ajada once said, and it's someone I'm fond of, that people must be the authors of their own development. And then development is, how do you define it for me? What development you may not be for me. And that's why I also need to be at the sit at the table, and to have a seat at that table, I must be educated.
Thank you.
Whether that's speaking English language or something else, but anyway, just education. If you are educated in Wolof or Mandinka or Jola or Sarahule, it's just education.
Exactly. The language is not important. It's the fact that you are educated. So thanks for that, Mustafa. And now on to another perennial. Every year we see something like this. In fact, this video that you're about to see could have come from last year. What am I talking about? Watch this and you'll know. You'll say, yes, he's right. Watch this.
Speaking to QTV, an emotional Demba Sonko, a resident of the Social Security Housing Estate in Jabang, says they have reached out to authorities, but help has not been forthcoming. He explains that the floods are caused by the poor sewage system and the building of houses on the culverts, which block the waterways and thereby flooding the entire neighborhood.
Continuous rains, which has caused this damage to our settlement. You've seen from the mosque down there, the rain water has been flowing and it has nowhere to go. The only problem here we are encountering is the waterway, that is to have a sewage to at least make this water drain out to where it can empty itself. That's our main problem here.
And now, I think they say a picture paints 1,000 words. I think those pictures paint 1,000,000 words. Mustafa, I grew up in Sierra Leone, as I keep saying, and in Freetown we're lucky in a sense. You have the hills, and so the rain, even when it's ferocious, and of course it rains much heavier. In fact, Sierra Leone gets more rain than any other country in West Africa. But it rushes down to the sea because of the topography. We don't have that here. But having said that, I've been coming here since 1992. We've been having floods since 1992. Why are we not better prepared to mitigate against what we've just seen?
Yeah, and in fact, we don't have proper planning. Sometimes you even think that thinking itself is an afterthought for us. I mean, sometimes you think that we do it.
I'll have to steal that.
Think.
It's a great line. Yeah.
Because if you are building an estate, for example, you need to think about these things. You need to think of, this is an estate. You have to design it.
Yes.
Right. You have to think about waterways. You have to think about whether there will obviously be drainages, and if buildings are constructed on a waterway, water, you can't contain it.
I mean,
somehow.
When I went to the university convocation, and I saw the number of lawyers that were being turned out, as against the number of civil engineers, I think suddenly I realized why we have problems.
Yes, true.
You don't need lawyers, you need civil engineers. Yes, I mean, come on. As you said, if you're building, you would have had plans.
Yes.
Okay, you have your architect who can construct the house.
Yes.
But what about the civil engineers who construct the surroundings and design the surroundings to let water flow out rather than gather and end up evicting people? They can't use their mosque, they can't use their own house.
And it happens everywhere. You have fiscal planning here, you have various institutions here. But even whereas the law says you can't, for example, build a road, let's say 50 meters, build a compound, 50 meters from the road.
From the road.
You just allow people to just come and build on the road.
10 minutes, 10 meters from the road, there's
so
a house.
later when there's a problem, you come and say, oh, we will have to remove all these houses. When you remove them, it's at a huge cost to taxpayers.
Well, this is it, and we're about to face that with the OIC. All these roads that need to be widened. When you look at some of the houses that have been built, they're going to have to be knocked down if those roads are going to be widened.
So it's the same thing we do with settlements, new settlements, and they're springing up all over Combo South. The same cases with land. Land is being bought and sold all over the place. So we are never going to regulate all these things and properly work it out so that there are better settlements, there are well-designed new settlements, and then have problems like this solved. You have settlements in this country where every year there is flood. With limited,
that's why I said we could have shown this from last year.
Even with limited rainfall. The capital is part of those. Ibo town is part of those. Talending is part of those. You have Kotu. You can name them. There are
Manjai.
incredible number of places that will flood. And even where we have a sewage, you would have someone either throw a lot of dirt in it to prevent any water from passing, like it happened at the sewages right on the road.
Absolutely.
You have them piled with a bunch of papers and plastics and everything
I saw it.
else.
I drove past it.
Yes, because the whole point also, I think also there is so much indifference and apathy in the population that people don't understand themselves as being part of the broader governance infrastructure. That there is nobody who is moving the country, that we are moving the country, and we must all move it together.
I think that's a great point to end on. We're all moving it together. And now on to the next story. Again, COVID-19 dominates, and so have a look at this, and it's to do with sample collection.
The sample collection site registers less than 100 people a day for sample collection and COVID-19 test.
During the initial stage of this screening test, the turnout was very, very good, and then people turn out in large numbers compared to now. Now there is a very low turnout.
During our visit to sample collection sites, the one in Brusubi near the Petroleum Building registers the lowest public turnout. It is already 11 a.m. and I can only meet one person who has been waiting for more than half an hour to have her sample collected for a COVID-19 test. She spoke to us on condition of anonymity. The woman shared with me how difficult it has been for her to trace the sample collection site and suggested a signboard for the site to be easily traced by the public.
No excuses for why, no excuses at all for why we chose that clip, because you saw there somebody waiting at 11 o'clock and they were the only person there. And the reason I chose it was a slightly selfish. Somebody, a friend from Sierra Leone, contacted me saying her sister's here and she's having problems getting to a sample collection site because they're overrun. So I told her to watch that. Why is it that people are not going? Well, they're not being charged, it's free.
Yeah, it's free. I mean, there could be a number of factors. But of course, you would, if you had been following COVID cases very keenly, of course, I know you've been, you would see that that at the beginning, right away until about a month ago, people would go for their test and the rest would come 1 month later.
Yeah, of course.
Some 1 week later, some 2 weeks later. So it would drag on for a very lot of time. Some would even complain that even if they had COVID, they're okay by now.
I've heard that 100 times. In fact, I'll start collecting money every time I hear that. I'm going to be rich.
So you know, there was a bit of a frustration with the process.
Sure.
And there were people also at the beginning who were having it difficult to have access to treatment, to test.
The testing.
Like myself, for example, there was this day I had a disturbance and I didn't think I was feeling well, and I had, without going to the specifics, but I had some complications. So I took a taxi, you know, with my hand sanitizer and my mask, and I drove to somewhere to Ndemban, and I called some guy who is a health worker, actually a senior guy at the ministry, who told me the guys are not working today, and I had to go to some place to self-isolate myself. I was at that place for 2 weeks, but to cut it short, for 3 days I wasn't able to get anyone to come to me or to get anyone to tell me concretely a place I can go to have a test. So you see, if there are people who go through those kind of complications and they are sharing their stories, so it can dampen spirits.
I'm glad I didn't share my story because I got tested at them, but I had to wait for 3.5 hours before, and it was a really hot day. We were sweating.
And you were lucky because if you, I know a story, or because I did a story on this, a very long one titled "The Health System on the Brink of Collapse," which I was following a number of cases, how people who were tested, how long they've had to wait, and the conditions and quarantines and a number of issues. But like I said, these are some of the things that would frustrate people. And also, even if you go to some hospitals, for example, you would see that a number of healthcare workers were also infected.
Indeed.
So you had people who had thought, in fact, that they were infected by healthcare workers. You know, and as a result, when I was at Bundum Maternity, and this is a very, very nice hospital, they have a very good customer care delivery. Bundum, if anyone knows, in terms of maternity care. They have a lot of people who come to that hospital every day. I think on a good day, Saturdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, they would have, I think, about 400 or little less. But if you go there on some of these days, during the peak period, you will realize that people were not coming.
They're not coming,
They were scared. Because a lot of people there were infected.
I think that's a point to end it on, because it sort of explains some of the reasons why people were not getting. And we have a few more stories to get through. So let's crack on. And the next is our next door neighbor, Senegal. They did slightly differently in terms of how they dealt with it, how they coped with it, and how they have emerged or are emerging from it. Have a look at this.
In spite of its low resources, Senegal has emerged second in a recent study, which looked at how 36 countries handled the pandemic. In the same study, which included a mix of wealthy, middle-income and developing nations, the United States came out 31st out of the 36 countries examined by Foreign Policy magazine. When the country registered its first cases, President Macky Sall imposed a curfew, made face covering compulsory, and restricted travel between the 14 regions of the country.
Thanks. there to our colleague Marie-Louise Sanyang, who gave us exactly the kind of stats that we want to discuss. 36 countries surveyed. Senegal was second. I think New Zealand were first, and America were 31st. Which kind of tells you that
Trump's country.
Well, exactly.
Well, he was there all over the place telling people.
Well, this is it, and so different approaches. And this was an independent study done, so it wasn't that there was no kind of political coloration to it. But towards the end there, you heard Marie-Louise Sanyang talk about some of what Senegal did. Stop people from traveling from different parts of the country, and they had to stay where they are. Very, very quickly that was imposed. I mean, they tried something, or when it was thought about here in the Gambia, people started complaining. And so it was as if people's civil liberties against health. But surely your health is as much a civil liberty as anything else. And in terms of, as I said, we don't have much time, but in terms of Senegal and how they dealt with it, how much were you aware of what they were doing?
Well, Senegal put a lot of emphasis on testing. You would know that the African Center, there is this Africa-wide laboratory that is there. Even us, we send our lab results to them. After, of course, our guys at MRC and at public laboratory can test and they can give you a result. But at some point, they send some of these results, according to the minister, to that laboratory for quality control measures.
Indeed.
So they are big. They can do mass testing, and they can do testing within minutes and give you a result.
Indeed.
Now they do testing. In the Gambia, we don't do a very widespread. In fact, at the beginning, we were doing a very limited one. Now it's expanded to almost about 400 a day.
Indeed.
We have the capacity of 400 a day, but sometimes even 200, sometimes 150, sometimes 175. So that's one thing. And two, Senegal put a lot of emphasis on containing the virus. Even though, of course, you would have the kind of indifference Gambia started with. I think that also comes down to the number of how authorities were able to accommodate dissent and all the other varying factors. For example, I think that, in South Africa, for example, when they had the agenda, they made all the political parties and all the varying factions to buy in. Religious movement, political parties, so that when those people are convinced, the carrier of the message is not just the government. But it's also the political parties, the opposition, the religious groups. And then everybody, we wouldn't have a case where someone says, oh no, this is just a way of government making money.
Yes, indeed. As I said, we don't have much time because we've got 3 more stories and a break. But thanks for that, Mustafa. And so we'll take another quick commercial break, a short one this time, and then when we come back, we've got 3 more stories, and I promise we'll deal with all 3 of them. So don't go away, stay with us.
Your favorite QCell service has gotten bigger. eFunkanta. Now you can loan bigger credit amounts to make life easier for you. Loan $75 and $100 and pay later. Yes, you heard me right. Get credit loan from $10 to $100 using eFunkanta by dialing *393#. Anytime you run out of credit, whether you want to buy Q-Power, browse the internet, make urgent calls, or send SMS, eFunkanta is the service for you. Dial *393# and choose the loan amount of your choice with no hassle. For more information, call our customer care on 111. QCell, Sunyabus, the pioneers of mobile loan service in the Gambia. We innovate, others follow. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back. You're watching The Week in Review. I'm your host, Ade Darami, and my very, very special guest is Mustafa K. Dabo of Malagan, which is an online publication. Mustafa, once again, some very good insights so far. And now let's get on to the first of our final 3 stories, and this is about the first World Solar Tech Summit. I was surprised that it was the first ever. Have a look at this clip.
The International Solar Alliance is made up of 121 member countries whose aim is to create a global market system to tap the benefits of solar power and promote clean energy applications. The alliance came into effect when India's Prime Minister and former President of France, François Hollande, at the 21st session of the United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties in France on 30th November 2015, agreed to form a coalition of solar resource-rich countries to address their special energy needs. Speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister of India, Shri R.K. Sheikh, who doubles as the Minister of Power and Renewable Energy, urged member countries under the United Nations to come forward and join the crusade in the fight to preserve the world.
Welcome back. And really, after that clip, I really was surprised when I heard my colleague say there that this was the first such summit, 121 countries involved. They're online. And the reason I was surprised is because a lot of the countries are countries where they could have benefited from solar technology for the last 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. You have countries in Europe that have far less sunshine than ours, and they're getting, towns that have 35 and 40% of their electricity generated by solar. Why have we not embraced it in the way that we should have? Do you have any sense?
Well, it's difficult to get grasp of it because we've even experimented using wind turbines in Batokungu. They're there. They're efficient.
Yeah, they're very.
Solar, we have solar, even in currently in some places like the Chinese embassy.
Yeah.
The LED lights they are using there, they are solar powered.
Yeah.
In Kanilai they experimented some there, and so in fact the biggest problem every observer is having with NAWEC is why they're not having all these these street lights on these LED lights, so that the councils would be free of the cost that they levy on them. On this data, it's millions of dollars, and it's making the councils and NAWEC inefficient because the councils can't pay. And central government, of course, say charge it to NAWEC. Charge it to the councils. This is the councils because that's how Jambe designed it. But it's creating complications. Not just that, we're having capacity challenges. But for me personally, and this may not be the case, but personally my opinion is that efficiency is not profitable to the corrupt.
A good point. I think end it there. Sorry about that. We have two more stories. And the next is the International Republican Institute and their virtual roundtable. And have a look at this. And they had made some very, very good points. Just have a look at this quick clip.
We want to hear from the executive how decisions around COVID in as far as education, trade, agriculture, and health were done. What were, what kind of communication or what are the strategies these, the ministries used to inform citizens about those decisions that are taken?
And there you heard kind of what we were talking about, education and so on. About citizens holding their governments to account to ask them questions about how did you take the decisions that you said you've taken in my interest. What are your thoughts on that? It
was an interesting program. Last year IRI organized a similar event, and they brought together and they are organizing another similar one on mining minerals.
Okay, right.
And then this one is interesting because it brought together various sectors, from education, from finance and others, to come and talk about government decisions that were made, trade, including trade, government decisions that were made, and why those decisions are made, and what were the results in those decisions. And I think that I made a point there where I was one of those who participated in the Zoom conference, and I was telling them that probably one of the most significant things the government could improve on is with regards to how they spend the COVID money. And the 500 million.
I'm glad you said that, because when I kind of listened to it, a similar point came to me, and I thought, has there been any indication from government that they're going to be doing that sort of review, that sort of thinking back? I mean, have you got any inkling that that is about to happen?
Well, the good thing is that the finance ministry do publish quarterly data and monthly data of their brief expenditure. Now, but when finance ministry does this, they publish a bulk. If you publish, for example, that government spends 1.18 billion on so what?
It's not broken down.
It's not broken down. You don't tell me how much is spent in hotels. You don't tell me this. As for I've struggled to get it for 2 months and I couldn't have it.
Sure.
And it's not published anywhere. But of course they do, on the first quarter as of April, they did supply this expenditure to the National Assembly Committee on the Implementation of State of Emergency.
Indeed, yes.
And the committee that was monitoring the state of emergency. But they also give it to National Assembly members. As at that time, they were broken down, and about 14 point something was spent on hotels.
That's right,
and 12 million or thereabout was spent on vehicles and stuff. But right now, out of the 200 and something millions that are spent, we don't have a breakdown.
Sure. I think we have to hold it there, otherwise we won't have time for our last story. And so final clip and our final story that we're going to discuss. Have a look at this.
Ngai Masisa says that government should decriminalize suicide and focus more on how to prevent suicide from occurring by coming up with a national suicide prevention strategy to educate Gambians about suicide.
So what the government should actually do, for example, set up a national suicide prevention strategy that really brings together different sectors in the country, in the government, to see how best they can prevent it. And this, of course, includes the economic sector, the social sector, the health sector as well. They should try to make sure that mental health facilities are available.
You see, this is what happens when you're enjoying the conversation. You end up with, not much time. So we don't have much time, but we'll still try and do some justice to this. And she was mentioning there about having a national suicide prevention strategy, because this is important, but also about the fact that unlike many countries that have taken it off the statute books as being a criminal offence, we still have it. In fact, it's a hangover from the British days, when if you attempt suicide and you fail, you then get charged and taken to court and sent to jail. It's a nonsense. Surely we should take that off.
Where you can also commit suicide.
You can kill yourself anyway.
Yes. And I think that suicide is an effect of something.
Yes.
It comes from something.
Sure.
So if we address the cause, we will obviously address the effect. If someone commits suicide because the person owes some money and can't pay, probably he needs to get a job. Probably he doesn't have a job. There are a lot of things that causes stress and mental issues, and I think that's what professionals would need, and government need to help professionals look into those kind of issues, whether it's economic problems, whether it's just some common mental disorder, and anything, and come up with recommendations, and we try to get people who are suffering those kind of difficulties or depressions help, so that we can avert the situation.
And I think the point that was made there about having a national suicide prevention strategy is I think appropriate. So final word from you really on that, if we can, because we have to wrap up.
It is appropriate. It will though be very complex, because there are various reasons that leads to suicide. So you'll have to look at all those various issues separately. Why does anybody have those issues? Then you address that. If it is depression, why does anybody get depressed? So if you would, absolutely, I think it's workable, but there has to be a professional involvement in this, and government, and proper funding, and then they can address it. But there's no point sending people to jail because they committed a suicide and failed to kill themselves.
It's a nonsense. And I have to say, on a sad personal note, I have twice been with people who hours later killed themselves in quite separate situations, and none of us, their close friends, foresaw that they were about to go and kill themselves. So it's not an easy thing to deal with, and I have to say thanks. So just have to end by saying, Mustafa, really enjoyed the chat. Thank you for coming along, and thanks for being a special guest today.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And to our viewers, as always, I have to say thank you for sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Hope you found it riveting. And of course, I always say to you, join us again next week. And finally, thanks for watching. Goodbye.